Good to be back with you today. We are back in the book of Revelation, chapter 18. Last week we were in chapter 17, and we saw the religious system, religious Babylon, receive its judgment that God had judged it with. The angel called out to John and showed that to him. Today another angel calls out to John in chapter 18, and he shows John yet another aspect of Babylon in the tribulation period. God uses that word Babylon to describe what's happening there. Babylon in the Old Testament was a wicked, evil, powerful empire. The religious empire of the world is that and will be in the tribulation period, and so is the commercialization of the Great Tribulation, the commerce of that day, if you will. It will be a great and an evil and a very wicked and powerful empire. Some look at Babylon as being a physical city that is rebuilt. Some look at this and understand it as talking about a system of operation. As I look at it, honestly, church, I can see both there. I believe that the city may actually be rebuilt and may be the headquarters that the Antichrist will work out of as far as the commerce of the world goes. And we're talking about this happening now at the very closing of the Great Tribulation period. And it is also probably that physical city being rebuilt, but I believe it also can be that system of commerce of the world. Those two things blended together that God is going to judge. So why would God judge a system? Well, we saw that he judged a system of religion last week in chapter 17. This system of commerce is, greatly the same. It works the same. And I want to read you this is just a definition of a world system in that day, as much as the world system today, actually, just a little stronger and a little worse in its intentions. The world system and the commercial system in that day would be a system consisting of religious, political, and commercial ideologies that promote, spread, and put forth into the lives of the people the agenda of that one that wishes to destroy them, the devil himself. And that agenda is the separation of God and man. That system working in conjunction with the commerce of the world to put into the minds of the people that they don't need God. That was Babylon in the Old Testament. They said they were going to build a tower to the world. They made the decision. And there is that separation of man and God. That is the system in which we speak of today and the physical place that it represents. As we begin, I want us to look in verse 1 of chapter 18. And after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Verse 3 says, For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornications, and the kings of the earth have committed fornications with her, and the merchants of the earth have waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. I hope you picked up on the wordage there in verse 2, where it says that after Babylon is fallen, it has become the habitation of devils. Babylon in that day, as it is rebuilt, it is the center of the world commerce, and the Antichrist will use it as a hub of its governance. It will attract and possess, if you will, itself many demonic spirits and unclean and dark things. We say, well, I wonder how that can be. Well, remember that we're talking about the end of the Great Tribulation period, and the ruler of the world is the Antichrist. Satan's incarnate man that he puts here to work in the world and to be a world ruler, to draw the world together. And this world will be under demonic influence as it never has been. And this Babylon will draw those things. These dark beings will gravitate to Babylon. It'll be a very wicked, very demonic place. It'll be a place that is filled with cults, with occult things, with Satan worship. It'll be filled with witchcraft and just every false religion, every strange and demonic cult you can think of. It'll be attracted to Babylon, because in these days Babylon will be where it's at and where things are happening. Now, as we read this, we'll see words there as it talks about in verse 3, the delicacies, speaking about the luxuries of life in that day, having all that money can buy. Don't think that the whole world will live this way. Remember, we've seen back earlier in our studies that we've seen food and oil is spoke of, and it talked about those being separate. And one was the food of the poor, and the oil is speaking to the food of those that have riches. Look, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about those that have an abundance of things, those that are just wealth beyond measure. And then there are going to be those in the world, like much of us will be, the poor, that find it hard to live, hard to get by. These will be those that have taken the mark, and they will have an abundance of things. All the nations of the world will unite around this city Babylon because of its power, because of its great influence, both in the demonic aspect and in just the wealth that's concentrated in that city. The kings of the earth, you see that they commit fornication with her. This is how they made themselves rich. This is how they've made their nations flourish, because they have been associated with the Antichrist. They are members of the elite of Babylon, if you will. Now, another thing in the last verse of this chapter, we'll see that this nation, this city, has shed the blood of the saints, and God does not forget. This city falls because of its sins. Not only the sins of this particular city in that day, in the latter part of the tribulation period, not only the sins of these demonic influences and these religions and what it's doing to the world at that time, but it will fall because of the sins from Genesis chapter 6, I believe it is, to Revelation 18. It will fall because it is who it is and what it represents. It represents the destruction of the saints, a work against God, the separation of God from man. That is its sin, and it will fall. Next, notice after the cry of the angel that it's fallen, John hears another voice that says, "Come out of her, my people." God calls his people out, church, before he's going to destroy this Babylon. And I think there's something here for us today. He calls his people out from this wicked city, from this city of wicked commerce, from wicked influence that's just steeped in wickedness. God calls it out, his people out from them. He calls his people out because if they stay there, look at the rest of the verse, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. It is the city that is supposed to be judged, not the children of God. And there are children of God in that day. There are those that are living, that are God's people, because there'll be some to go into the millennial period. God says, come out. If you're in that city, come out. Don't have any part of this city, whether you live in this actual Babylon or not. Just let that system go. Don't worry about that system. God will care for his people. He tells them to come out so that it will not be judged with this city. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. God remembers sin, church. God may judge sin, sometimes almost the moment that it's committed. And then sometimes sin just goes and we wonder if God will ever judge. But God will judge. This Babylon began to sin back in the book of Genesis, and here we find it thousands and thousands of years later in chapter 18 in the book of Revelation. God finally judges. And he judges. And when he judges, it's a thorough judgment. He said, reward, in verse 6, he said, reward even unto her, reward you, and double unto her, double according to her works, in the cup which she hath filled to her double. He wants double judgment, double the judgment upon her, in which she levied upon those of his in this world. And he says there in that verse, look, she's responsible for this judgment. She filled her cup, and she is the one that is responsible for it. Not I, not anyone else. She's just getting what she deserves, and she is so wicked and has done so many atrocious things against my people. I am going to judge her double. He judges her because of her sin, and her sin is, look, idolatry. That's what it is. Verse 7 says, how much she hath glorified herself, a self-worship. She lived deliciously, that's luxuriously. So much torment and sorrow give her, for she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. She sees herself separated from God and has no need of God. She has no need of anyone. She sits as a queen. The world, everyone is there to serve her. She's no widow. She doesn't have to worry about doing anything. She's the queen. Everything revolves around her. Everyone cares for her needs. She has no worries. God says, I'm going to judge her, and I'm going to judge her quickly. Therefore shall her place come in one day, death and mourning and famine. They're going to come in one day. Oh, it took many millennia of time for it to get here. But once God decides, once those sins come up to him, as they did in Noah's day, the sins of the world, as Sodom did with Lot, as Nineveh did, that he warned Jonah about. When those sins come up to him, judgment is near. And to this Babylon, God says it's going to come. She's going to be destroyed. Her judgment will come in one day. And it is a great judgment. For we see that, look, the kings of the earth, their reaction, beginning in verse 9. Those that were in lockstep with her, Scripture says, and paints this picture as committed fornication with her and lived deliciously with her. Look, they bewail her, they lament her because of her great destruction, but there's nothing they can do. Her destruction is so thorough that verse 10 says they have to stand afar off and they gaze into the distance on Babylon, that great city, that city that made them rich, that gave them the lifestyle that they had, is gone. It's gone. Verse 11 says, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her. These are those that did business with Babylon and that economic system, that commercial system. For no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. Their life is changed. They do not have the same life anymore. The economic system of the world now is changed because Babylon has been destroyed. God has judged that evil, wicked system. And those that were involved, they weep and they wail over it. In verse 20, they may weep and wail, but I want you to notice the reaction in heaven. Heaven rejoices over Babylon's fall. Now, I want you to understand this. I'll have to do this quickly. They did not rejoice over so much the destruction of life, but they rejoiced that righteousness prevailed. Righteousness in the end came. God set things right, and we rejoice over that as well. God bless. Look through this, study it in deeper. It'll mean so much more to you, and we'll see you again and pick up next week in chapter 19. God bless.